Okay, lovely. Well, welcome to Essex Wildlife Trust's Wilder Communities programme. This is the orchard creation webinar for our Transform with Trees topics. And yeah, it's our second to last webinar for 2023. Can't believe the year is going that quickly. And it's for our Team Wilder project. So that includes wildlife champions, river champions, wilder towns, wilder villages, and next door nature. So I'm sure most of you here will be familiar with one of those projects. Thank you very much for coming along this evening. I am Danielle Carbot, the Wilder Communities Manager at Essex Wildlife Trust. And yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to talking about possibly a more autumnal topic as we've now moved into September. I don't know, the weather's nearly autumnal, my favourite time. I don't know if we're quite there yet. It was 26 degrees today, but yeah, looking forward to talking about orchards today. But before we kick off, this is a webinar, so you will not be able to turn your camera or microphone on, and if you want to, you can actually hide your name as well. But if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and I will answer them at the end. There is also, of course, always an opportunity to book in site visits as well for more bespoke support if you are looking at creating an orchard in your local area. So the session this evening, as I've said, will focus on community orchard creation, and it really is a great community project, probably one of the best out there, as it has benefits for both people and wildlife. And to get everybody in the mood, I'm just going to start with a very quick video, which is from the Orchard Project, which is a national charity with great resources, all dedicated towards the creation of community orchards. And then, yeah, this will pretty much just highlight the benefits of community orchards before we dive into the topic. Just a very quick video that gives you a really key insight before we dive into the topic of why they're just a really great community project and something that we're really promoting here at Essex Wildlife Trust as a great wildlife project too. So orchards, although essentially a crop, can provide remarkable havens for wildlife as they have that kind of mosaic of habitats, a large variety of plant species. They are by definition a collection of fruit or sometimes nut trees. And they're often planted within a grassland. And even more wonderfully, which is why they are great, they can be planted almost anywhere in our parks, playing fields, allotment sites, land around social housing, school grounds, residential care homes, along paths, and other small or large open spaces, meaning that they can be a really useful and exciting resource or even a hub for local communities. So yeah, it's a great one to look at. I'm really excited to talk about it today. So initial steps, I'm going to kind of lay the land of sort of from beginning to end, how you might pull together a project to build and create a community orchard. And the first step is really where you want to plant it. That's a really important step and one that you do need to take a little bit of time over. Overall guidance suggests that orchards need sunlight, so somewhere open and out of shade is preferable because most trees need around 10 hours of sun a day during the kind of peak growing season. Also, where possible, avoid chalky or waterlogged or sandy soils, as this will hinder the growing success. Best fit really is well drained and fertile soil. Particularly because trees don't like having wet feet. So the best thing really is definitely to avoid waterlogging. But of course, if you are focusing on specific fruit tree varieties, then the best thing really is to research which conditions they prefer. We will go into fruit tree varieties in a little more detail later on, but yeah, looking at where you want to put that orchard and the best conditions for that variety can be really important. But if you're not sure yet, think really about the soil and where that land is, making sure it's in a sunny, open position. But testing your soil can be useful if you're not sure about it. You can get kits for this. Some soils are a little bit more acidic or more alkaline. There are things that you can do to balance these out if you've only got one option in terms of land. Or, of course, try and choose varieties of fruit or nut trees that suit that soil. So yeah, have a look at where the potential places are, check out your soil, and that will give you kind of the first steps towards planning an orchard. Um, when you have identified that suitable piece of land as well, reach out to the relevant people to share and promote your project idea. So that land might be within your local council if they own that. It could be, a housing association that you need to reach out to, governors at a local school, CEOs or site managers if the land is being held within a business. Pretty much wherever you want to potentially plant your orchard, build relationships with those that own the land and promote the benefits of a community orchard where possible. You really need to get them on board because, we're not really expecting anybody to be able to go out and buy parcels of land. Really, you're looking at land within your local area that's close by and might be a really good spot. So it's that collaboration that's really needed at this stage. And then, of course, once you've got those agreements in place and agreements have been made, obtaining consent and permissions is important, and perhaps even a tenancy agreement. But that will be, based on individual projects and who you're talking to. If it is derelict land that you've spotted, you may even be able to exercise the community right to reclaim derelict land where it's publicly owned. So certainly something to look at if you found a spot and yeah, it's derelict but is actually publicly owned. That can happen a lot, particularly in urban spaces. Or if you're struggling to find land, you've also got land share. And Community Land Advisory Service website. The land share is all about helping you to connect up to landowners or, lands that communities already look after, where you can plant fruit, farm fruit, create orchards. And then the Community Land Advisory Service website is really a space where you can go and get some great guidance on how to access land, negotiate with landowners, and all those kind of legal agreements and requirements. So yeah, that's a good place to start if you haven't been able to find any land at all in your local area. And within that first initial step, it is really important that you do not do it alone. So even if you are a local parish council or town council, or you're already an urban wildlife champion, don't try and get this part of the planning done by yourself because you really want to ensure that the project is success from the get-go. So you need to be including local residents and other members of the community where possible. And really, a great thing about that is you can then form a community group around that to oversee the project and its future management. And something that I do try and say to people when they're talking about orchard creation is, have you actually asked your community, do you want a community orchard? Where would you like to see one? Because if you don't have the backing of your community, then it really will be a hard task to get this idea off the ground. So talk to people, meet people, get a feel for what your community actually wants. And of course, part of the Wild Communities team is that we can do that for you and with you, door knocking, going to community events, chatting to local residents with you. So definitely get an idea of what your community wants, form a community group, don't do this alone. And if your community group is on board and you do want to create that community group, this could be an informal setup or also just a network of interested individuals or volunteers. And there is plenty of advice on how to set up community groups. But if you're not sure, we did actually have a webinar all about community groups last year. So if you go onto our YouTube channel, and I've just got the list there on the screen, you will find our previous webinar webinar recordings. And as you can see there, it's number 4, how to become constituted. So you'll find that on our YouTube channel under Urban Wildlife Champions webinars. I will also add in a link to that to follow up to this webinar anyway. But yeah, really great place to start if you're not sure how to set up a community group. One thing really I suppose I can share about that today, but I won't go into detail, is try and keep that set up as modern and as flexible as possible, so it is accessible to a wide variety of people. So into the kind of more imaginative, fun design part, once you've set up your community group and know exactly where your orchard will be planted and have in place all those relevant agreements and permissions, you have reached the planning stage. And the best thing here to do is to map out your site. So you will need kind of either, a digital map of your site or just a normal OS maps where you can maybe sketch out your designs with pen or paper or add on to it digitally, whichever suits. But here's some examples on the screen. Really what you want to do is plan where the trees will be planted, the varieties that you want to include, paths around the site, access to the site, and then possibly space set aside for community events. And we will look at community events in more detail as well later. So think carefully about the fruit trees you want to include, because that really is a massive part of your design. Try and include varieties that have long fruiting seasons, or those that bear fruit at a time of the year that is suitable for your local community, because fruit trees can pretty much fruit and produce crop from June onwards. You want to kind of think, do you want an early flowering and fruit producing fruit tree, or do you want a later one, or one that has a really long period? So just, have a look, research which one might suit your community. And then also try and pick a wide variety of fruit trees. We suggest not going into kind of a monocultural, just buy the same variety and plant the same variety. Get some different varieties, different fruits, as this will really help with pollination. And actually check that it is compatible with pollination as well. Often fruit trees need a pollinating partner. And therefore you need to choose fruit trees that should be flowering around the same time. This relates to many varieties of apple, pear, and sweet cherry, for example. Or, if you don't really want to go down that route of trying to find pollinating partners and making sure that the pollination is compatible, you could also look for self-pollinating varieties as well. That's sometimes quite useful if you've got a smaller plot as well. There's some cherries that are self-pollinating, apricots and peaches. Also talk to your potential supplier as well. That would be really helpful. Research your fruit trees with them, get an idea of what varieties are out there, go on to the internet. The RHS website has some great information around various different fruit tree varieties. But the best thing really is to understand what works and what doesn't for you and your community. The only kind of variety that I'm going to fly the flag for today is crab apples. And although not usually edible straight from the tree, they really are a great addition as they are good pollinating partners. They kind of flower for a really long period of time. And from a wildlife perspective as well, they're a good source of pollen and are associated with around 93 insect species. So if you're really thinking about not just the kind of community aspect that's, fruit picking, you're thinking as well about supporting your local wildlife, then that is a really good one to introduce onto the site. Similarly, for wildlife reasons, apple trees as a whole support 25 different species of bee and hoverfly, as they are kind of consistent bloomers. So that's the only variety that I'm going to fly the flag for today, but definitely get out there and research what varieties could be possible. So you can't really design your orchard until you've done that step. And it may be, of course, that you would like to include your community in which tree varieties you want as well. You could do that through a Google survey form, or some form of voting system at your village hall or within a local newsletter. Get people on board. It can be quite an important step as well, as there may be other varieties of fruit that are connected to your community cultures, or more local varieties that can be planted too. So get people involved in this stage. You never know, there might be some fruit tree experts out there that you can help you out as well. Again, feed this back into the land, the orchard that will be planted on as well. If you know your soil, check whether the varieties you picked suit that area. I mean, in essence, for this stage, really, it's take as much time as you can on this part of your planning, because if you get this right, then hopefully you will be more successful and the chances of survival of those fruit trees will be higher. Also consider layout as well. So although within that design planning, I've kind of banged on about thinking about your fruit tree varieties, that really comes into play for your layout as well, because in general, fruit trees are grafted from something called a rootstock. And there will be advice on how much space is needed for each variety, as the rootstock pretty much controls the vigor of your plant. And here I've just copied over some information from RHS about apple tree rootstocks as an example. So at the top there, you've got an MM111 variety, which is good. That's a rootstock, and that's good for standard and half standards. And it just shows there that it will grow to around 4.5 meters, whereas the one at the bottom, M25, is only good for standard, so slightly bigger, and will grow to more than 4.5 meters. So those pieces of information there will really help you work out your layout. And there's also some good information on there as well about spacing, growing conditions, staking and fruiting. So looking at your varieties and the rootstocks, those two together can really help with your design. Yeah, choosing the right tree for your space, essentially. You could, of course, choose a variety of rootstocks to get a variety of sizes and more diversity. So the exact same in terms of your fruit tree varieties. You might go for some standard rootstocks, so you're getting some bigger fruit trees, but then you might also go for some half standard rootstocks as well. So you're having, some smaller fruit trees in there that don't need as much space. And of course, it depends on how large the land that you're looking at as well. If you've only got a small space, you might want to go for half standards or even something smaller. And in general, half standards are better for picking, as they aren't as tall and tend to fruit later. So maybe a better option if you want to provide kind of free fruit for the community as a main aim. Think also as well in terms of layout about not planting your orchard in the corners of sites either. Try more central locations so they are kind of in those sunny spaces. And be imaginative with your designs. You don't necessarily have to go in straight lines. You know, be playful with it. Think about where those paths might go in. Use the spacing as a way to work out, how people might enter into your orchard and then walk around and enjoy that space. And of course, again, we are here to support you through this stage, through site visits and so on, so we can actually come to the space that you have in mind for your orchard, have a walk round and give you some key pointers. And of course, once the plan is in place, start thinking about your planting season and what you need to do in advance of getting the trees in the ground. Sometimes we kind of want to, skip ahead to the planting day, the fun action day, but there's still a lot more to do before you get those trees in the ground. Even if you have planned out your design, you know what fruit trees you are getting. You need to find a fruit tree supplier. You need to create a budget, and then ultimately most people also need to apply for funding. And I've just popped on the screen there an example of funding that you can actually get at the moment. So it's the Branching Out Fund, which is through the Tree Council. It was actually included in my last Team Wilder newsletter. And they're accepting applications for community orchard establishment at the moment. And actually, it is usually available every year. And you can just see some information on my screen there. And they've got grants from 250 to 2,500. So it really depends on what kind of orchard setup you're going for. But the deadline for application is Sunday the 3rd of December. So if you are already kind of on your journey of orchard creation, then possibly this funding is suitable for you. Or alternatively, look for local funding pots. There are always, kind of Essex-based ones or ones that are based within your council area or district. Where possible, I do include these in monthly newsletters. In the one just gone, I included one for an area around Stansted. But you also may have access to more as well. So, find out if there's any in your local area that you can utilise. And we can support with funding applications as well by providing letters of support where appropriate. So reach out if you've got any questions about that application, and you need possibly some support with that funding application and getting some letters of support. And then when buying the trees themselves, there are options. So think carefully about what you want to get. And again, that really depends on the size of land you're going for. You can go for bare root trees known as whips. These are basically saplings that are dormant and have a very short shelf life. So they do need to be planted very, very quickly, but they are much cheaper and much smaller. So if you're going for quite a small orchard, or you've just got a small community group that are doing this, then they're a good option. They're generally kind of delivered in around November time and can be planted up until March at a push. And this tends to be the kind of standard way that people plant up orchards. But my suggestion is, if the budget allows it and if you do get more funding, where possible, opt for the more mature maiden trees, which are usually around about a year old. These often form better root systems and generally just have a much better chance of survival. And, they go into the ground looking a lot more established. So if you're in a very, busy public area or it's an urban site, you might want your fruit trees to be a little bit more mature so they aren't damaged as easily, and people can kind of enjoy them straight away. As I said, for the kind of bare roots, planting can take place from November up until March, but we would sort of suggest November through to the end of February. But where possible, try if you can to plant before Christmas, as our springs and our summers are just getting drier and drier, and getting newly planted trees through their first summer can be a little bit of an uphill battle if rainfall is low, a bit like we experienced in 2022. So don't rush your project. Although we're talking about this at the end of September, and we've got kind of the 2023-2024 planting season coming up ahead of us, if you feel that you aren't ready for the closest planting season, then just wait until next year. You can take as much time as you want to get your plans in place. And really, it's better not to rush it, and know exactly what you want to buy, know where you're getting your funding from, and your kind of design and the varieties that you're going for. And then, of course, we're on to the planting bit itself, the kind of the fun bit. Once you've done all that hard work in terms of design, you've got your community group together. This is where you can get, even more people involved, make it into an event, invite lots of people. Perhaps you could even, include your local school or scouts or brownies, whatever it might be. It's planting day. And the more people you have, the easier the planting day will be and the better the celebration. You could even go a little bit extra and plan an open day where a red ribbon is cut. It's totally up to you, but there is a lot of opportunity in the kind of orchard planting day to get as many people involved and to kind of create that excitement that a new community area, resource hub, whatever you want to call it, is there ready for people to use. So perhaps, and maybe obviously, it is really important before your planning event that you use your planning design at this point. So use markers to map out the design on the piece of land you intend to plant on, mark out where the access will be and the planned paths across the site are, and mark out where the holes need to be dug and measure out the spacing between each tree. In some cases, you could do this as part of your planning event, have a kind of mapping out, marking up session. Or in some cases, especially if you are involving children or, the local primary school, it can be really good to do this in advance of the planting event. And also, of course, it depends on how many people you've got coming on the day and volunteering on the day. But yeah, really do use those designs that you've put so much effort into actually marking out where your trees and all that sort of bits go, because everyone gets really excited on the planting day, and it can be really easy to plant trees in the wrong space, or get the wrong varieties in the wrong hole. So just think about marking that out, maybe signing up, so it's really easy for people to just go in and plant the tree in the right place. Now for the planting itself, it's fairly simple, and I've got this kind of neat little diagram that represents that for you on the screen here. So first of all, dig out a square hole. Most people kind of go for a circular hole, but square is now a kind of tried and tested formula, and it's a much better shape for the root system. And it needs to be about sort of 40 by 40 in terms of centimeters, particularly if it is a maiden tree, so a tree that's a year old, just to ensure that the roots have space and they're comfortable. However, you don't want to make that hole too deep either. Lots of people do kind of dig really far down, and you're getting quite a lot of trunk actually into the hole itself. You only want to go down kind of 25 to 30 centimeters in terms of depth. So not really that deep at all. It's really just so your root system is down into that hole. Also, don't add compost to the hole. Just use the soil that has been dug out. You can, if you want to, add mycorrhizal fungi, I should say, as this is often recommended. You can get that in either like a powder or a liquid, and that does help with growing success. But the reason we say sort of avoid and don't recommend compost is it creates this almost kind of luxury space, and a lot of research has gone into it where they've found that actually the roots don't tend to penetrate further than that compost, and this can kind of stunt growth or cause issue with growth. It is also in some cases as well an issue with waterlogging. Compost can actually stay quite wet. And as I said right at the beginning of the webinar, fruit trees don't like wet feet. So compost can create a bit of a soggy environment that you want to avoid. However, do mulch the tree. So once it's planted in, mulch on top, as this will improve the soil over time. And I will cover mulching in a little bit more detail as well. But yeah, mulch on top, maybe wood chip, grass clippings, whatever you've got really for mulch, pop that on top. Some people do use mulch mats, which is absolutely fine, maybe if you're in an urban area, but you can have problems with moles with mulch mats. So, if you're in a kind of farm environment or a wider landscape, maybe think of some other different ways of mulching. Of course, as well with mulching, this does increase the nutrients in the soil, so you will find that other plants will start to grow. So there is a case of kind of needing to hand weed where possible. It's just one of those things, but again, we do suggest being kind of pesticide free and not spraying around the base of your tree, trying to keep it as natural as possible. Staking is also important too, particularly for half standards, to ensure the base of the tree doesn't move around too much in the wind or bad weather. You want to go for kind of around 90 centimeters in length, and then you can use one of those buckle ties to attach them together to create that kind of solid structure. And then, of course, once in the ground, you will want to water it. A kind of a really, important bit, even if it's rained, even if you feel it is a little bit of wet, a bit wet underfoot, water it, because that will help the roots settle, and help the roots kind of get into their kind of natural space, into that soil. So it's a really important part, water it. You can also, of course, protect the trees with guards. That's not in this illustration here, but really that's only relevant to the areas where there might be some potential grazers. So you might have deer or things like that will come along and munch away at your fruit trees. Or of course, if the orchard itself is in a very public space and you're worried about the smaller whips being in danger of being trodden on or something like that. So that's also, of course, absolutely an option as well. So yeah, a really neat diagram, but is quite an easy job for planting trees. Anybody can get involved, children, anybody that is in your local community should be able to come along and pop one of these in, particularly if you've really marked out the varieties and dug out the holes as well. So. And now that you've got your trees in, it really is important that you've labeled those trees and mapped them out for your community to make it a usable space. The labels can be as creative as you like, and possibly designed by the groups that you worked with, like the local schools or guides, or maybe there's a local artist. Whatever it might be, get those labels designed. They can be tied around the trees or popped in as stakes in the ground. However you choose to do it, make it really clear as to what variety each fruit tree is, as in most cases they will not begin to fruit in the first or second season. So you don't want to kind of plant in your fruit varieties and then go away and sort of forget which varieties what. You want your community to be able to go into that orchard and know exactly what variety is in there, so they can maybe plan what they might pick in the future, and also just so they can enjoy and understand the space for themselves. For the mapping as well, not just about labeling the fruit trees in situ mapping. You can do kind of printable handouts or digital PDFs, or even a site interpretation board. The more you do to make the site as welcoming as possible, the more care and interest the community will show. And if it is clear how you access and kind of move around the site, where the paths are, where the access is, people will be able to understand the site and it will be used in a better way as well. So any kind of interpretation signage, yeah, we definitely recommend. And this will also help the site become a free fruit resource and a community hub as well. So really it's a case of not underestimating how useful signs can be, because some members of the community might not have been able to be part of the community group that plans this, or even attended the planting day itself, but you never know, they might use the resource later down the line. They might enjoy going sitting in that area, walking around the site. So you really want it to be accessible for as many people as possible. And you could also include some helpful tips as well, such as when the fruit might be ready to pick, or what recipes might be good to try out as well once those fruit trees are established and ready to go. And I've just got onto the screen there just a few ideas of interpretation boards. But yeah, just hopefully demonstrates what you can do to make this into a resource for the local community. But yeah, it's up to you, however you want it to look. And you might get it designed by your community group as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily fancy. It can be, homemade, handmade, whatever suits you and your community. And then future plans. Once a community orchard is planted, that's not really the end of the action or the journey, as there is future management, and management of the site is needed. I can't go into kind of all the detail today, but here I've got kind of a list of things I'm going to go through that you could or should include. And obviously the first one, and the one that I think maybe most volunteer group and community groups struggle with, is watering, particularly over harsh, dry summers. As I said, in the last few years, we are getting, increasingly dry spells in our spring and our summer. So it may be that you want to set up kind of a volunteering rota where you've got, designated people that are going to your orchard, now and then to, oh sorry, it's just changed slide, hasn't it, now and then, to kind of water those trees that are in need. And of course you might also want to install access to water as well. This might not be possible for everybody, but the closer the water is, the easier it is to set up a rota and get those trees watered. As I already mentioned as well, you should mulch on the planting day itself, but it really is great to do this in the first kind of 2 to 3 years to help improve the soil and encourage good growth. You can use wood chip. So often I found groups find it useful if they find kind of a local supplier, so they've got a delivery of wood chip coming in, or alternatively grass clippings. So if you want it to be a cheaper version, you might have, volunteers that have grass clippings from their own gardens. But if you're managing the grassland on your site, you should be able to gather your own grass clippings anyway. So a really easy and simple way of mulching. Midwinter pruning. Once the trees are established, then pruning is important for future management, just in order to kind of keep the shape of the tree, protect it from infection or rot, and ultimately to keep it producing more fruit. It is important to prune when the fruit tree is dormant, though, and that's not always in midwinter. So, although I said midwinter pruning, check your variety, because if you've got some unusual varieties, there will have been some advice given around when to prune that, or of course just look it up as well. For example, some cherries need pruning in the summer season. So yeah, future management, think about how you might do that. Definitely something to consider in your planning. And then going back to kind of grassland as well, I said you can use the kind of grass clippings for mulching, but you will also need to do grassland management. The grassland around an orchard can be a wonderful habitat in itself. And if I've met some of you, you've probably already heard me bang on about grasslands and meadows way too often already. But yeah, they can be home to, native wildflower species. So we do recommend cutting and collecting your grassland within your orchard on an annual or a biannual basis. So late summer, if you're doing annually, but then if you're doing it twice, late summer and early spring. This really helps to encourage wildflowers to grow and bloom over the summer months. And yeah, it just adds to that variety of habitats, that mosaic of habitats that you've got in your orchard. So it's a wildlife haven. And of course, if you want more advice on this, we can help. So that's definitely something to consider in terms of future management as well. And then, of course, path maintenance. You might want to mow in a series of paths across the site, and they will be, they'll need to be maintained. So it's just thinking about your site and looking at, okay, here's our planting day. What do we now need to do to keep this site managed and maintained? And all this can be achieved through monthly or seasonal work parties. So that community group that you initially set up for this project plan, get them together, plan out how and when you will manage the site together. And actually it can be really, really fun, and people tend to learn a lot of new skills. So it's a really important part to kind of bake into your planning. Don't leave it until you've done the planting day, I should say. Think about how you're going to move forward with your future management. And that takes me back to funding as well. So when planning and looking at your budget, try to include the equipment that you might need as well, not just the trees. Think about, do you need stakes? Do you need kind of, a ride-on mower? Do you need, scything tools? Do you need loppers to prune? Do you need watering cans for watering? Do you maybe want to pay for the water to be installed? There's all these different types of things that you can include in some of your funding applications. So you're not thinking about this, post planting. And then, of course, you want to keep the community interested as well. So it's not just about kind of future management and maintaining that orchard. You want to include the community and, keep people being interested in that community hub and resource. So you could go for things like fruit picking events, depending on the varieties that you've chosen. Fruit pressing during the harvest season, could even go as far as cider making if you want to take it a step further. Educational tours or talks about the orchard itself or the wildlife that it's supporting. You could, get people doing surveys across the site, maybe looking at what wildflowers are growing, what bee species they might be seeing, that sort of thing, what butterflies are on site. You could even do that kind of English traditional wassailing. I think I might be saying that wrong actually. But that involves pretty much waking up the trees and blessing the orchard for a good harvest to come. You can do that with pots and pans, instruments. I've been to one myself. There's lots of singing, celebrating. It's a really good way to kind of bring the community on board and remind them that you've got an orchard there that's ready to be harvested later on in the year. Or you could kind of go down the kind of simple campfire evenings or summer evening picnics or, day events where families can come and just enjoy the space. It doesn't have to be connected to the orchard or the wildlife, just a nice space for people to go and enjoy. And again, all of these ideas takes me back to the planning for some kind of community space. I mentioned it right at the beginning. Where possible, try and think, is there space for people to gather in your design? The kind of ideas that I've listed there, they're not extensive, but they can provide an excellent way to engage with other members of the community and spread awareness of the benefits of an orchard. So, you want to think about having that space. Can people get in? Can they come together for some of those activities? If you have a small area where community members can meet and take part in events or sessions, then yeah, it just adds it to being that connection for the community, where people can, meet, creating a better connection and that sort of thing. And in some places, we are missing that. So think about that as being an extra bonus in addition to your site. Now, of course, that was kind of a whirlwind tour of planning an orchard. But there are some really good guides out there that I would suggest utilizing before you get started, as they may help with any kind of further questions you have on some of the topics I've briefly discussed today. So you've got Growing Urban Orchards Toolkit. This is by Susan Poisner. This is American, so it's not all applicable, but it has some fabulous in-depth information about fruit tree care itself and some great case studies of some urban community orchards that are really interesting. You've then got the Orchard Project webpage, which was the video that I showed you right at the beginning to kind of help with some inspiration. But they've got an excellent landing page where you can pretty much find everything you need for the planning stage and more. You've then got the Community Orchard Handbook. I haven't read it myself, but I do know that it's kind of a recommended one-stop shop if you manage a community orchard. You've then got kind of starting up community orchards and fruit gardens by Farm Garden. Quite a simple guide, but it's a good place to start, especially if you're new to the topic. And then you've got the gov.uk Community Orchard Case Studies website. Some really good examples of community orchards across the UK. So really relevant, and can kind of give you some key ideas and key learnings, and maybe even some ideas of, where you can go and look at community orchards. So, because it's sometimes really nice to see these things in action. And then you've also got the Tree Council's Planning and Orchard Guide, another good place to start, particularly if you are thinking of applying to the Branching Out Fund as well. So, that's again not an extensive list, but some really good starting points that you can go and utilize. Because I can't cover everything today, but hopefully, if you are thinking of moving forward with this plan, they should be useful. And that nicely brings us to the end of the webinar. And I would like to say, yeah, a big thank you, because I know some of you on the webinar here today are already taking some fantastic action. If you're in one of our Team Wilder projects, you're already doing some fantastic stuff for wildlife and people across the county of Essex. But I hope that was useful in terms of, getting started with orchard creation. But we, just as a reminder as well, obviously we've had this webinar today. We've also got one tomorrow, which is on hedgerow creation. So yeah, please join us if you are interested in that as well. But we do have some time, as always, for questions. So if you do have any questions, pop it in the chat, and we can go through anything that you want to this evening. Or of course, please drop me an email. I can always come to your site, have a look at your area, and we can talk about where best would be. Yeah, we could do an orchard for you and your local community. But yeah, any questions, pop them in the chat. Yep, so I've just had a question here. Is the webinar being recorded? Yes, so it's been recorded. It does need a little bit of clipping, but then it will come out in your October Team Wilder newsletter. And again, any kind of past webinars can be found on our YouTube channel.